Hi, welcome to Head Start, the podcast for race directors and the business of putting on races. First run on a whim in 1982 by Oregon Roadrunners Club president Bob Foote, with only 8 teams participating in the inaugural race, Hood to Coast has grown from modest beginnings to become a huge success story. More than 40 years on, the race that has come to be known affectionately as the mother of all relays now attracts more than 1,000 teams from over 40 countries to what is one of the most spectacular 200-mile courses from the top of Mount Hood to the Pacific Ocean. So what's the secret sauce? What is it about this race being able to sell out for the last 30 of its 40-odd race editions? And how is it even possible to pull off recruiting 3,600 volunteers, let alone training and managing them to a T year in, year out, with a core of just a handful of people? Well, that's what we'll be digging into today with the help of my guest, Hood to Coast race director Felicia Hubber. Felicia, being the daughter of the man who started it all and the person driving Hood to Coast's expansion both domestically and overseas, has literally grown alongside Hood to Coast, having been born the same year as the inaugural event, and she'll walk us through what makes Hood to Coast so special in the eyes of the thousands of people taking part, the appeal of the mountain-to-sea race concept, the mind-boggling complexities of putting on a relay race at this size, and Hood to Coast's unique approach to volunteer recruitment and training. And this is a great episode for the relay curious among you, wanting to get an inside look into what it takes to organize a world-class relay race, and a big flashing light bulb of an episode for those of you struggling with volunteer recruitment in particular. So, stick around for a super fun-filled 60 minutes or so. Now, before we get into this amazing episode, I'd like to give a quick shout out to our amazing podcast sponsor, Run Sign Up, Race Directors' favorite all-in-one technology solution for endurance and fundraising events. More than 28,000 in-person, virtual, and hybrid events use Run Sign Up's free and integrated solution to save time, grow their events, and raise more. And we'll be hearing a bit more from this great company a little later in the podcast. But now, let's dive into our discussion on the mother of all relays with Hood to Coast race director Felicia Hubber. Felicia, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for being able to join you today.
Well, thanks a lot for taking the time, particularly 23 days out from Hood to Coast. This episode actually will probably go out after Hood to Coast, but this is a pretty stressful time for you, for sure.
Yes, it is, but to be anticipated. You know, we're going on 41 years of the event and 18 years for myself. So we have some things down, but yes, there are variables.
Exactly. I mean, there's always, you could be doing this for 50 years and there's always like a curveball every single time. But as we'll see, you're one of those events that you've taken meticulous notes. So year on year must be super straightforward to go on.
Yes, to a degree. We are always making variations to the event for sure. But yeah, we definitely have systems in place. And I feel like organization is the name of the game. Obviously, for most race directors, that's the case as well. But with 197 miles along the entire race course, there's an infinite number of variables that we're often dealing with people and property owners and permits. So, yes.
Yeah, I think you're being very modest in just mentioning the distance there. As we'll see in a sec when we go into the format of Hood to Coast. It is it's just stupidly complicated. Let's put it that way. So we'll get into that in a sec. Now, where are you based? I mean, I'm guessing you're based around Portland somewhere, but you and the team physically, are you in the city of Portland? Are you around Portland? Where's sort of like headquarters for you?
Yeah, we are in Portland, Oregon. So kind of the epicenter of a lot of the running culture in Oregon. I feel like, it's Eugene and Portland. We've got Nike right in our neighborhood as well. So we have running trails just about half a mile from us. So it's a beautiful area. We've got green trees and sunshine today.
To be fair, you have a lot more than just a running scene. I mean, last time I went there, great foodie scene, very charming place to live. I think still sort of as charming as I remember them.
Yeah, Portland's been in a lot of headlines, of course, recently with things that they've been dealing with cleaning up the city. And, of course, depending on your politics, everyone has a point of view on that. But Portland really does, as you mentioned, have so much character, so much personality. It's really fun to be able to showcase the beautiful, unique elements of the city of Portland for participants that are coming from outside the area, as well as people who are maybe from the Portland area but don't make it into the city as much.
And you're born and raised Portlander?
I actually am. Yeah, I feel like there's not a whole lot of us. But yeah, I was born and raised in Portland and moved to Montana for a while. And that's where I met my husband. And then I pulled him back out to Portland after we graduated from university.
Awesome. So you are the race director of Hood to Coast, which you've been since, remind me again, is that 2009?
So I started in 2006 and yeah, officially became race director in 2009.
Okay, awesome.
So yeah, going on about 17 years. Time flies.
Well, and of course, as we'll see, you've been sort of indirectly involved with the race for much longer than that. Actually, let's go into that. You want to give us like a brief history of this very monumental race?
Sure, sure. So my father started Hood to Coast way back in 1982, which was the same year that I was born. So it's easy to remember how old I am every year. But he was the president of Oregon Roadrunners Club at the time, and he was an ultra marathon runner as well. And so he had a group of a lot of running friends in the community, and he had done a small 1 day relay that was down in Coos Bay at the time. And it was a relay that was about every 2 miles you were rotating with exchange points. And he and his friends had never done anything like that before. And they had such a great time. They were thinking, okay, how do I combine this into something where I get to do this again with all of my running friends, but I'm combining two of my favorite holiday destinations, which were the beach at the Pacific Ocean, which was nearby, only 60 miles away from Portland, and then Mount Hood, where my dad loved to go skiing every winter. So he was like, why not combine my two favorite destinations into one amazing weekend of running? So he just decided to kind of haphazardly create this fun experience for he and his friends. And that first year, there were just 6 teams. And it was very, how do I say, just off the cuff. They really just like would blow through exchanges, which maybe happened to be in the middle of an intersection. But for my dad, who was very analytical, it was like, well, this is exactly 5.0 miles. This is where we're going to put the exchange. And they would just roll right through. And there were no permits. There were no portable toilets. Nothing organized. They were literally just flying through on the road. And they started at near the top of Mount Hood and continued down through to Pacific City. So that the first few years, it was literally just word of mouth. So my dad did not anticipate making this into an actual business. He was a full-time architect at the time and owned an architecture business. And it just kind of took on a life of its own. So his friends and, he wanted to continue on running as well. But in that second year, it just ballooned from 6 teams up to, I believe it was 64 teams. And a few weeks before he was going to run in this second race, he was just inundated with people wanting to run. So he realized, I'm not going to be able to run this year. I'm going to have to just organize this. So he and my mom really kind of just took that on, and it blossomed again, just word of mouth from that point on. So in the third year, it reached about 120 teams. Fourth year, it was up to 250. And then in the fifth year, it got up to 500. And then it just really exploded in popularity from that point on, literally just word of mouth. The event took on, as I said, a life of its own and continued to expand until we started reaching a cap, having to cap it at 1,000 teams. And those were just Hood to Coast. The Portland Coast Walk had not started yet as well. So yeah, it was just something where it was a pure labor of love that the community and the participants really kind of created themselves.
Yeah. I mean, I love these stories. There's a couple in mass participation events, of these kinds of events that spring out of almost like a wager at a pub or something, like a couple of people
Yeah.
come to get something, like 2-3 crazy folks.
Yep.
I
Yep.
think Otilo, which is a great race in Sweden as well, where they sort of like do island hopping, sort of started like that, a bunch of folks like, oh yeah, why don't we do that? And then it just goes and takes a life of its own, as you say. Now, I often see this being told of Hood to Coast. People refer to it as the mother of all relays. You said it's up to 1,000 teams. That's 12-person teams. So that's a lot of people running there. I mean, there's two spins, I guess, to the mother of all relays. One is being the first or the earliest, and the other one is being the largest. Hood to Coast is definitely the latter. Was it one of the first sort of like relays in terms of the format as a race? Was it, or were there other events before that may have even inspired your father?
As far as we know, Hood to Coast was the first long distance running relay. So as I mentioned, my dad participated in this small, short 1-day relay that was down in Coos Bay, where they were only running, about 2 miles. But that was just a 1-day relay. There was nothing that was combined, basically 2-day overnight long distance running relay. So that was really kind of a new foray that no one had experienced before. And it was just kind of coinciding with the early 80s running boom. So it really, I think, inspired people, and they found this unique and different and interesting and something that was not like your typical marathon or 10K race that people were already participating in. This was something that they could do together as a running community, and experience something, come together, and really, it just, as I mentioned, just really took on a life of its own from that point on.
And as you mentioned, the race has been selling out for over 30 years, in fact, according to Wikipedia. 12,000 runners. I have to ask, when I see sort of like races selling out or capping participation and stuff, is there room to grow and you've sort of held back? Or is there some physical constraint that stops you from expanding the race even further?
Yeah, we could potentially expand the race larger. We'd need to get approval, of course, through the counties and permits. We did do that 1 year for the 30th anniversary of Hood to Coast. We expanded to 1,250 teams for Hood to Coast, and we wanted to explore and see, could we make this into something larger? Uh, the answer, unfortunately, was yes, we could, but the quality of the event would suffer. And we did not feel that that was in the best interests of the participants or ourselves to, yes, we could create this larger event, but the traffic would be, inundated much more so. And it became too large. So we go into some, smaller coast range mountain rural communities, and the capacity for parking and vehicles just really, really stretched us to the limit. So we realized, you know what, it's just not worth it. Let's keep the capacity at 1,000 teams for Hood to Coast. And then we keep the capacity for the Portland to Coast Walk at 400 teams. So we put people on a wait list. If there are, a few extenuating circumstances where Hood to Coast team cannot participate, we bring up somebody else from the wait list. So we have a pretty large wait list that happens every year. As I mentioned, we sell out on opening day of registration and have for the last 30 years straight. So I think that's also a huge draw of Hood to Coast, is the fact that it is so exclusive. People want to participate, but your chances of getting in, there's like a one in 3, sometimes 1 in 4 chance.
Wow. And the course, has that remained fairly constant for the past however long?
Yeah, it's stayed somewhat similar since about 1989, when we moved the finish to Seaside, Oregon, which is a larger coastal community that could handle a bigger capacity of runners and walkers. It does fluctuate a bit year to year based on the property owners, and we have 35 different exchange points. So depending on, maybe major construction issues, along the roadways, or a property owner that just doesn't want to participate anymore, we might vary the course slightly. There's been a few years where gosh, I want to say it was probably 10, 12 years ago, where we had to change about 6 different exchange points along the race course. So that did vary. That was an extra burden, extra load, I guess, for all of us in the staff. But usually each year, maybe one exchange changes. Otherwise, we try to keep the route very similar.
And as we'll see later, actually, Hood to Coast has recently expanded overseas. We're going to see that you guys are doing races in China and Israel and other places, and we're going to touch on that a little later in the podcast. And the common thing in all these expansions is the whole running from a mountain peak down to sea level kind of thing. How much of the appeal of Hood to Coast you think is in that? In is there something special to the people running it, or something like the whole, I'm going to go from the top of a mountain down to sea level to the beach?
Yeah, I think there's definitely something extremely iconic and so visually expressive about when you are driving up to Mount Hood. I mean, you all of a sudden have this amazing viewpoint of this monumental peak that is 11,200 feet high, with snow-capped glacier mountains that are there year round, and these amazing, beautiful national forests all surrounding you as well. And it's so impactful. Like you get up to the start line there at the top of Mount Hood, next to these snowy glaciers, basically, and you're taking off just super, super steep downhill for the first 5 miles. I think you descend about 2,000 feet in 5 miles. And so it's like taking off like a rocket ship, like in that first leg. And you literally just are downhill for the first 6 legs from that point on. And it's so, as I said, just so epically beautiful. Like the natural environment, obviously, of the Pacific Northwest is so beautiful. And I feel like Hood to Coast does a good job of showcasing some amazing different parts of the Northwest in that way. Coming down through, as I said, those national forests from Mount Hood. Then you get down into some really beautiful rural farmlands with cherry trees and agriculture. And then you make it down into the city of Portland. So you have this really cool, different urban environment, and you're running over the Tillicum Bridge in downtown Portland and seeing the beautiful cityscape along the river. And then you're continuing on into more rural communities, and then going up over the Coast Range Mountains. So another set of of mountain ranges, to then finally descend into the beach and have this huge, huge beach party physically on the sand next to the Pacific Ocean. And it's one of the largest beach parties on the West Coast. And it's just, the way it culminates is such a celebration. And people really look forward to experiencing that finish party. I think that's really a huge draw as well. And it's that carrot at the end to feel like I can push through, I can make it, because there's going to be this amazing celebration at the finish, and I'm going to be able to celebrate with my friends. And it's pretty incredible where, people are staying up for sometimes 36 hours. It varies. The first teams finish in about 16 or 17 hours and continue through about 36 hours. But, they're running on fumes. A lot of people, might be able to sleep 2 to 3 hours, over the course of this entire event. But they somehow muster the energy, when they finish on that Saturday, to stay up again till 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock at night and be dancing, because we have live music throughout the whole day and evening. So it's really a cool, amazing experience to see how much fun people have. And it's very inspiring.
Yeah, I saw there was I didn't watch the full movie. There's like a documentary about Hood to Coast, and you can definitely sense that it is a super, super fun event. I mean, I can tell when a race is awesome, and you can definitely tell that Hood to Coast has all the elements of being like a super amazing experience. Now, you mentioned the 36 hours. Let's dive into the actual format and break it down for people. And this is where I think just a hint of the complexity of putting on an event like this begins to emerge, because your local 10K or your, closest metro marathon or whatever, you put on your shoes, you show up at the start line, you run. Here you have vans, you have legs, you have handovers, you have exchanges, you have not to go into the armies of volunteers on which we're going to have a very lengthy discussion later, but just walk us through how the relay works, particularly for people who are completely ignorant of how relays work in a context of a mass participation event.
So in a relay environment, and particularly for Hood to Coast, obviously, we have teams of 8 to 12 people on a team, runners or walkers. And these teams have two vehicles. So it's broken up. You have 6 runners or 6 walkers in each vehicle. And there are 35 exchange points with Hood to Coast. Obviously, it'll vary depending on the relay and how long it is. 197 miles. So each runner will run anywhere in distance from 3 to 7.5 miles. On average, it's about 5. And they rotate, and each runner stays in sequence running their leg, what we consider a leg of approximately 5 miles. And then they hand off a baton, or what we do is a wrist wrap, to the next runner in rotation. And they continue on in the same sequence for legs 1 through 12, for runners 1 through 12. And they continue in that sequence for 3 legs, which is what it is for Hood to Coast. Again, depending on the event, might be 2 legs or it might be 4. If a team has, say, 8 runners, they're going to run 4 legs instead. So, the average total distance could be about 20 miles. So, it really does vary depending on how difficult you want to make that experience. We typically do not allow fewer than 8 members on a team, just because that's really considered an ultra distance, unless they show us specific qualifications of how they can do this. So with the relay, again, as I mentioned, there are 35 exchange points, and it spans anywhere from 17 hours up to 36 hours total in distance. And it continues overnight. So the first start waves with Hood to Coast start at 2:30 in the morning, and the last runners will be finishing the following day at 8 p.m. So it encompasses quite a large time span as well.
Okay, so just to summarize, let me put it into kilometers, which is how I understand these things best. So it's around 320 kilometers, is it? Somewhere around there?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
So 320 kilometers, which is like 200 miles, right? Something like that.
Yep.
Then you have 36 legs with 35 exchange points, okay? You basically take teams of 8 or 12, you put them you put the names in a row, and basically they go one by one through every leg and they rotate. And depending on whether it's 8 or 12, they end up doing either 3 legs per person or 4 legs per person, right? And there's a 36-hour cutoff.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. 320 kilometers in 36 hours. I mean, it's downhill. It's a team of 12, but then I guess you rotate, you'll be up 24, 36 hours. It doesn't sound like a walk in the park, right? I mean, it still sounds like it's pushing people, right? They can't just walk this thing.
Exactly. Yeah, it's definitely a strain. I would say. So I participated in the event about 6 times before actually running, or starting to work in the event. I got to participate in it with my dad and another time with friends. So a few different variations. And as a runner, I run 5 days a week. I was still very sore after all of that. It's basically the equivalent of running a half marathon or a little more. And, another kind of variable is the lack of sleep, because that really kind of can throw people into some other challenging aspects besides actually just running. But we do have a very diverse group of runners and walkers of all different abilities and walks of life. We have people that are, maybe weekend joggers as well as elite Olympic athletes. So it really, really varies. People that are, just trying to get in shape, maybe got, inspired to lose weight or for, fundraising for cancer research, for a family member, things like that. So people who maybe would not consider themselves runners, taking this on and really challenging themselves and persevering and really making it through. I mean, people really surprise themselves when they have a reason and a drive. They can push through and do things that you might look at the outset and think, oh, there's no way that they can do this, but they do. And they accomplish this. And sometimes people say, this changed my life and it changed the trajectory of my life. I became so much healthier after this experience. And it's very inspiring to see.
Yeah, I think that's the great beauty of the industry we're in. I mean, races do that to people, which is great. Do people tend to sleep between legs, or do they stay up for the full 36 hours?
So we have 3 different sleeping fields along the race course. So people do try to get some sleep. Typically that's maybe, varies anywhere from about hour and a half to 3 hours, depending on how fast you can fall asleep. Um, and they're designated sleeping fields. So you can put out your sleeping bag. We also have one exchange that is the Alaska Air Campout. So we have tents set up for participants on a first come, first served basis. They can go crash and get some shut eye real quick for, a few hours in there. But typically, yeah, it's in that hour and a half to 3 hour range for the overnight portion.
And of course, I guess they can sleep in the van, right? I mean, there's no
Exactly.
rule against that.
Exactly. Yep. So totally open to sleeping fields or their vehicles. That's a possibility as well. Mm-hmm.
So what is the thinking between the two vans? Is there a purpose to that in having two vans specifically? Like even if a team, say could fit in one van or 3 vans or whatever, like what's the thinking behind some of these rules?
Yeah, so for the vans, it is based on size. So that is more easily maneuverable for parking versus having a larger, longer van or vehicle that would be harder to turn, especially where we have some smaller properties, in the Coast Range Mountains. A smaller vehicle, that holds 6 to 8 people is more optimal in these kind of scenarios. So that's why we have the split.
And in terms of international runners, I mean, for a race of this reputation and standing in its field, do you get many teams flying in from overseas and competing in Hood to Coast?
Yeah, we do. We have each year it varies a bit, but for example, this year we have teams from 43 different countries and all 50 states. So, they vary anywhere from, we've had honestly um, teams of military people from Afghanistan. We've had Singapore, Zimbabwe, a lot of teams from Brazil and Europe, a lot of teams from Japan and China. So it just varies widely, but it's really cool to see those international participants out there on the race course. And a lot of them, come out with like their national flags. And so you really can tell, where they're coming from. And it's really fun to be able to have that multicultural experience and talk to them as well.
Yeah, that's one of the great things about these kinds of races. And I can definitely, when you were saying military people there, I can definitely see this being a very popular, event with, military teams all over, like Sweden or whatever. They always bring out people for that kind of thing. They bunch up, and it's a format actually that I guess works very well for military teams, corporate teams maybe as well, right? Because you have that kind of like bonding of the hierarchy and the organization of the army or the company or whatever behind it, right?
Exactly. And that is the amazing component about a relay type environment is you do develop a very, very fast rapport and connection with these people because you're having to work together and you get to know them so much quicker sometimes than you would in a corporate type of environment. And you get to see their fun side and really get to know who they are as people. and their challenges and, the triumphs that you can do and experience together as a team, but you can only do it together as a team. So it is very much, like you said, a team building experience that is fantastic for, again, like reunions, families, military, corporate type environments. And it's a way of doing it that doesn't feel stuffy.
Yeah. That said, I went on to your online forum that you have for volunteers and people and runners to sort of like, find each other and exchange ideas about the event and advice. And I did see that lots of teams enter without being complete, and then they'll just, do a shout out and they'll say, oh, we're missing 3 runners or 3 volunteers or whatever. So you also get, on the other end, just random or semi-random groups of people coming together and running this as a group.
Yes. Yeah, we do. And it's really kind of cool to see as well, in that same vein, how many people become really good friends. We've had quite a few people who have gotten married, just who randomly were put together on teams and developed a connection. And they'll circle back oftentimes. And actually, like there have been proposals during the race, like people getting down on one knee on the beach. So it's kind of that randomness and fun to be able to see how it does bring people together, because people of all different walks of life that you would never maybe necessarily put on a team that, like you said, they're looking for an extra runner and they, maybe don't know enough runners and need 1 or 2 extra people. And the way that people connect and develop those friendships is really cool to see.
So I think we can conclude that Hood to Coast, there is no such thing as a typical Hood to Coast participant. You get all kinds. Do you think that relays and Hood to Coast in particular, would you consider it a beginner friendly event? Or do you think, like, I guess on the spectrum of where it sits, it's something that someone might enter after they've done a few solo races?
Yeah, I would definitely recommend, after someone has, a runner or a walker has done a few solo events, definitely need to have, if possible, a few 10K type events under their belt. Optimally, a half marathon. Again, that's not necessary. That could always be a goal, moving forward. But having the ability to run 6 miles at a time is definitely a huge help. But again, you'd be surprised to see the variation in who is out there challenging themselves along the race course when you're out there on race day.
So you've got a great thing going. You've built a great event that people love from the ground up, and you're ready to take it to the next level. But is your technology up to it? If you've been hacking your way so far using different tools for different jobs, having a so-so website and spending hours moving data back and forth from your registration platform to your email marketing provider and so on, it's time you upgraded your tech before you look into upgrading your race. With Run Signups all-in-one technology solution, you'll get all the tools you need and more all in one place to help you build a solid foundation that will help support your race's growth for years to come. Free email marketing, an awesome free custom website, a fully customizable registration experience, and awesome fundraising and participant-to-participant referral tools are just some of the things you'll be getting when you join Run Signups' industry-leading platform. With that, you'll get the resources and support you need to get you through the next stages of your growth journey, and an amazing suite of race day tools to help you deliver a world-class race day experience to your participants and fans. So, to learn more about Run Signups' market-leading technology used by over 28,000 in-person, virtual, and hybrid events, and to book a free demo tailored to your needs, make sure to visit runsignup.com today. That's runsignup.com, and see what Run Signups' awesome race technology can do to take your event to the next level. Okay, now let's get back to the episode. So let's get into the nitty-gritty of things a little bit for all the race directors listening in. It's obviously to the outside world and to everyone looking in, super fun event, Hood to Coast, the whole concept, beach finish, amazing party and stuff. But there's a ton of rules, right? I was going through the rule book And it sounds pretty strict, actually. So, there's so many things, obviously born by experience. Many of them, I'm sure, learned the hard way, that participants are not allowed to do. Going back to sleeping, for instance, there is a rule about sleeping next to cars. As you said, there's like specific designated areas where you can sleep, and it's very strict on that. There's a very strict rule on alcohol, which I guess, is to be expected. But the way you phrase it sounds pretty cut and dry. I mean, obviously all races have rules. I know, because people discuss this in our race directors group on Facebook. Some rules, you saw a little bit of leniency and a little bit of judgment around. How strict are you in enforcing all of these things is question number one. And how can you possibly manage to look out for all of these rules and violations potentially over a 320-kilometer course?
Yeah, we definitely do take the rules very seriously, because it is something that it affects the quality of the overall experience of the race and the safety for us, obviously, and for every race director out there. That's number one priority. So these rules are in place to protect the participants and to protect the volunteers out there. We want everyone to have an amazing, fun, incredible experience, but safety needs to be the priority always. So being visible and adhering to these rules, like as you mentioned, the not sleeping next to your vehicle on the ground. I mean, these are just like basic things that sometimes people are not thinking straight after 24 hours of no sleep. So we need to reiterate these rules as being something that we do take seriously. So we have everything from, depending on the severity of the rule infraction, a 30-minute penalty, 60-minute penalty, or disqualification from the event, depending on, as I said, how severe the rule infraction is. So those are kind of overseen by our staff that are out there from start to finish along the race course and at the exchanges. And we also have our volunteers go through a training where we reiterate what those rules are. And we ask them, if they see something that is a rule infraction, to notify the nearest Hood to Coast staff person or exchange leader who's overseeing that exchange point, so that they can then address the issue and determine whether this is something that we need to, create a time penalty or a disqualification from.
Yeah, and your volunteer team and the way you train them is actually the bit that I found most amazing about the whole race. And we're going to jump into that in a minute. There's so much to discuss there with the video training you guys provide. And just as a, like a preview for people, we're going to getting into this in a sec, but you do have to manage 3,600 volunteers, which is mind-boggling. And the way you do it, actually, again, as I said, I think it's quite spectacular. These rules, have they sort of like been set in stone since the beginning, or are they things that you arrived at slowly, like with passing years and stuff like that?
In the early years, there were a few rules, of course, like runner rotation and things about making sure you're, not running on the roadway or trying to direct traffic, things like that. But some of the rules have been instituted just based on people obviously doing unsafe acts. So we had to create those rules down the road. And newer things like with technology, as far as recommending that participants do not wear headphones. That was something that, came along in the last 14 years, 14 years. With the volunteers, as you mentioned, there are 3,600 volunteers from start to finish. We have 35 exchange points. And as we mentioned, there's 197 miles along the race course. So volunteers are really crucial and integral to our event. They are, I know, for a lot of events as well, but we don't feel that the event would be the success that it is today without the assistance of these volunteers. And sometimes we've gotten a little bit of heat about, well, you should be hiring 3,600 people to do this. Well, the event literally could not happen from a financial standpoint if we were doing that. But for the most part, teams really understand that, hey, this event is so amazing. we want to participate in this, and we are definitely willing to provide 3 volunteers. And that's what we require. So if one person within the team is located within a 100-mile radius of Portland, we require that team to provide 3 volunteers for the race. So the team, the institution of requiring 3 volunteers came along in the early 1990s. So that wasn't always in place. That wasn't until it was realized that we need people to assist with the physical exchange points and making sure the handoff is happening correctly, or calling out team numbers, helping to check in teams at the start line, along with our staff, of course, or maybe directing vehicles within a parking area. So as I said, the event just would not be possible without their help. And the volunteers that are out there truly are also very, very inspiring, and getting to see the smiles and the joy that, for a lot of us who volunteer for other organizations, you can see the joy that it brings them to see the fun that the runners and walkers are having out there. And they're having a great time too. So it really brings, again, that community aspect to it of, we are all in this together. We're sharing the joy and helping to make this experience happen. And the volunteers are just as much as our staff is. The volunteers are as much a part of that experience as we are, who are, staff members. So when they are going through training, we really try to emphasize, obviously, the rules, but also how important their job is as a volunteer, and what the different capabilities are that they might be doing. So the online portion of volunteer training is something that was instituted, gosh, I want to say it was in about 2011, I believe. So we've been doing this going on about 12 years for the digital version or online version of volunteer training, because we just got to the standpoint where volunteer training was happening in person over the course of 2 days for 3,600 people. So we would have different stations where the volunteers were going through training. But the variation in how they were being trained, depending on the person who was training them, could vary so widely depending on what they were saying. We really wanted to have a template of knowing exactly what information and education these volunteers were going to be getting. And for that to be accurate and consistent, we felt that the best way to do that was to transition to a fully online version where we knew that they were receiving the training. And by doing that, we created, and it took a couple of years of trial and error, but creating a multiple choice quiz, basically, where volunteers were going through different video modules that we had created. They watched the videos, and these are training videos on the event and what the volunteers might be doing. And then they go through these 4 videos and have to answer a multiple choice quiz and get 75% of those questions correct in order to volunteer and pick the position along the race course and shift time that they would prefer.
And I've watched those videos, which are like really kind of like 5-6 minute videos. I can see that a lot of thought has gone into them, because you can see that not a word is wasted. They're not lengthy, but they're like straight to the point and very friendly. Like, they are amazingly effective just watching them as as a non-volunteer. But I can see why you really don't need much more info than those 4 or 5 minute video training modules. And of course, the great thing about the whole thing, going back to the whole policy you guys have, is that I guess volunteers turn up on race day, right? Because if they don't, their teams get disqualified.
Yes, exactly. And we have done that, and teams know that is a real hard and fast policy for us. So for teams want to be able to participate in the event, so they do provide those volunteers. And we're actually right now, interestingly, we just closed volunteer training last night. So any teams that have not gone through or have not provided volunteers who have not gone through the training, we give them a couple day grace period this week. However, if they don't get their act together and get those volunteers trained in the next few days, those teams are dropped from the event.
And this is, again, this is for local teams, right? Within 100 miles of Portland, which is how many of the total number of teams that you guys allow?
About 75% of the overall teams are with one member located within a 100-mile radius of Portland.
Okay. When you first mentioned this to me, the whole policy you guys have, which I have to admit, I mean, I don't know what's happening in every single event in the world, but it's the first time I see something like this, where basically you draw volunteers from sort of the wider circle of people participating in the event, and you make it absolutely mandatory. So basically, you don't put up the 3 volunteers per team, you get disqualified. You described this to me, and I can see from the way you discuss this that there must have been some pain around this and some pushback as a controversial thing. I personally don't see actually anything controversial about it. In fact, I think it's a fantastic policy, right? I mean, we often say that in so many things, right? Whether it's sustainability in races, all kinds of aspects of races, even the economics of it, who benefits out of these things and whose responsibility should it be for some of these things to be taken care of? And I really can't see anything wrong with the people enjoying the event, which is the participants, putting up the volunteers to do that. I mean, I can also see all kinds of benefits, like having friendly faces around and getting people involved. Because as you say, 3,600 participants, you're going to be charging people, like $3,000 to enter to put on this event. Like how else can you do it? Where did the controversy come from, I guess, is the short question behind all that.
I think it's always, as many race directors know, it's oftentimes the vocal minority that speak their minds about that kind of thing. So, you don't hear from the people that have no problem. You hear from the people that are, saying, these should be all hired staff people. Well, they don't really understand again, as I said, the expense of that and how the literal event would not be possible if that were the case. So it's something that, you're never going to pacify and make everybody happy, but this is the way that the event is possible.
Yeah. Personal thing here. And as you say, there's always, people who have all kinds of opinions, but I would actually love to be able to bring, like if I travel to Portland to do this race, have 2-3 people in my family, and we're talking about 12-person teams, right? Just, again, it would be friendly faces. I know that, whenever they just sit there as spectators, they get, taken over by the whole emotion in the race. So why not take part of it? I think it's a brilliant policy. And your video training, again, what I've seen is amazing. The fact that you guys can train 3,600 people without no one showing up before race day, just, watching a few videos and taking a test, which is also quite an innovation, I guess, because many people have all kinds of instruction materials and manuals and what's this before and stuff. But the test, I guess, is really important, right? I mean, I'm sure it's not rocket science, but it still puts people in the mindset of at least trying and making sure they know their stuff.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And it's like you said, sometimes a lot of the information that we're providing are common sense reminders, but they are helpful for teams and for the volunteers. And a lot of times they are former runners in the event who can't participate anymore. Maybe their body's just, broken down or they're having knee issues or whatever it is. And so they want to participate in some other way. So they actually do know the event quite well, and they transition and want to become a volunteer instead, just to be able to still be a part of what Hood to Coast is and be around that, kind of electric environment.
And again, going back to your training, I noticed that you also have a hierarchy within that. So it's not just, like 3,600 volunteers going out doing their thing. So you have the volunteers, then you have kind of like more leadership positions, which I guess are those paid staff? Are they part of the event? The people like your exchange leaders and your monitors and all of that. How do they integrate with the volunteers?
Yeah, so there are exchange leaders, as you mentioned, who their job is to oversee the volunteers at a specific exchange point. They go through a separate training with us just to go over the specifications of their location and certain dynamics and logistics for their exchange point. Those exchange leaders are actually volunteers as well, but they interface with our staff and we work directly with the exchange leaders. So it's kind of a dual operation with our staff as well as an exchange leader at an exchange point itself. And a lot of the exchange leaders have such an amazing time. They come back year after year. So it really helps because they retain that information and they often come back to us with amazing notes and suggestions for the following year of, hey, this is how I really think you should improve this exchange. Sometimes they'll bring out their own lights, and, above and beyond what we're already doing, and they really take ownership of it. And it's really, really cool to see people who, want to take charge and have that leadership capability, delegating and dispersing the volunteers where they need to go.
Now, one thing I noticed is that quite a few of those human resources are sort of employed in pointing people around the course, vehicles and runners. Is this just on kind of like tricky intersections, or you take a kind of approach of, like even where we could perhaps put a sign up, we'd rather have a person kind of thing?
We kind of do a bit of both. So at a specific turn along the race course, oftentimes we will obviously have very visible signage. But if it is, as you mentioned, a very important turn where runners might go off course and be venturing off for miles in the wrong direction, we employ and have a monitor at that location directing the vehicles and the runners to take that hard right. And it differs in a lot of ways from let's say a 10K where you could just put out a sign, in that the event goes overnight and the dark hours really create another challenge because you might put out a sign, but in the dead of night, and it is very, very dark out in those Coast Range mountains, there aren't streetlights. Having that person out there, with their flashing wand, in addition to the sign, is that extra layer that we feel is necessary.
I've seen recently, by which I mean over the last maybe 5-6 years, quite a lot of very interesting kind of event management, event safety type applications hitting the market and being taken up by events like, Paris Marathon and London Marathon, and really sort of like really large events. Hood to Coast sounds much more complicated than those, even if it has fewer people. It's just so many things to manage, exchange points and all that. Are you guys using something like that, like dedicated kind of like software for managing all that? I just wonder, how do you do that?
Yeah, so we have our communications director. We have a communications director and a communications coordinator where they interface with all of the emergency services, and I interface as well with every emergency management department for each county that we go through. And we go through 4 different counties. And all of our staff members, as well as every exchange leader, has an event radio because there's about a third of the whole race course without cell phone service. So those event radios provide us with system-wide 200-mile full communication with everyone. So if an emergency were to occur, we are on that and able to communicate with 911, police, fire, whoever is necessitated immediately. And that's really been important for our overall event safety as well. So we've actually put up repeater sites in order to have event radios with, as I said, full 200-mile system-wide communication, because about from legs 19 through 32, again, cell phone service is almost non-existent. And you'd think, in this day and age, where we are today, there's areas that don't have cell phone coverage, and that does create, an extra layer of needed communication for, like I said, event radios, but also we have stationary medic services out there on the race course as well, especially in those more remote areas. So yeah, we have a very extensive emergency action plan, and our coordination with each of those counties and emergency jurisdictions is important, and we have very close communication with them for the event.
But you don't issue GPS trackers to the team or anything like that.
Right. So we have looked into that, but again, with the lack of cell phone communication, those GPS trackers, the ones that we have looked at go from it'll be like a blue dot, let's say, where they have cell phone communication, and then once you get out of that cell phone communication, it turns to this gray dot, and the range of where that participant is again an estimation. So we're not able to actually see where they are on a minute or second by second basis. So we have not gotten to the capacity yet where we're utilizing, Starlink or full satellite. We've looked for companies to be able to provide something like that, and we would definitely be interested in it, but have not found the capacity to have fully accurate GPS tracking for participants, based on the fact that, the lack of communication in that third of the course is difficult.
Yeah, but I think that would still be, I mean, as you say, which is probably why you guys are looking at it, such an awesome thing, because now I guess you hand over the baton or whatever is the equivalent in a relay. It's a wristband, isn't it? Something like that?
Yes.
Right.
It's a slap band.
A slap band. Okay, great. So you can have that be, integrated with a GPS tracker or something, and you can look out for where its team is, and which is what a lot of events are doing, potentially even broadcasting it to the world, right? Having like a live leaderboard with where everyone is would be fun for 1,050 teams.
Absolutely. Be amazing. We would love to provide that in the future. And it'd be so fun to be able to provide that link to friends and family and people from all over the world to be able to follow, their runner or their walker and see where they are. Yeah, absolutely.
Let's talk a little bit economics. I am as clueless about relays as the next person, but something tells me that behind the operational complexity, there's probably better margins in it for race directors, right? Because for the same amount of distance, you have more people participating. You can up the fee per person kind of thing. And I may be asking a completely wrong person here because, your races have been selling out for ages. So, like the dynamics of a sold out race is quite different. But do you feel there's some truth in that? The fact that relays potentially can be better business propositions for race directors?
Yeah, I think, it really depends. If you're able to scale up and create the quantity of teams, you break through that threshold of it being profitable. However, the expanse of start to finish and having 35 exchange points where you're deploying staff and equipment, it's a huge expense. It really is. And then for us with Hood to Coast, we put on, not just your kind of minimal bare bones finish party. I mean, this is a huge, huge party on the beach. So it is a major expense, but it depends, I guess, on how large, how festive, how much you want to embellish the event and make it a real experience for participants. You can do it bare bones, and yeah, you can make it more profitable probably. But for Hood to Coast, and I think for a lot of relays, the expanse of being over a distance of so many miles actually increases the cost exponentially. So we're kind of on par with some of the larger marathons in the US as far as the cost on a participant basis. We do need to always take into consideration as well inflation, on a year-to-year basis, and costs increasing from vendors and permit agencies as well. So if you're able to do it at a larger capacity, it is worth your while. But as a small relay, I hesitate in saying, yes, do it. But if you have a big following, which we've been fortunate to be able to have, then yes, it's something that that's why we're here. We've been here for 41 years because we've been able to make it happen and persevered through COVID when a lot of events went under.
Yeah, I don't know whether it is the economics alone or the ability of relays to attract people to racing that wouldn't otherwise take part, which I think is behind the fact that I see lots of races, marathons, and other events adding relay events to race weekend. I actually see it a lot more these days. I'm trying to understand why that may be the case.
Yeah, I'm guessing that is just because of the fact that they want to add in that extra element, the team element, and maybe bringing in a different audience than would participate in the individual events. It might be more capable if it's on a smaller, 1 day segment of, hey, you're just running 3 miles twice, that's versus a 10K or half marathon. I think it definitely brings in a potentially a different demographic, different potential kind of runner. So I think it's smart if you're already creating an event, you already have an event in place and you have the existing infrastructure and course. Why not? Yeah, give it a try and see if it's embraced.
So I noticed in 2019, if Wikipedia is accurate, that you guys incorporated the Hood to Coast race series into a B corporation. What is a B corporation?
So a B corporation is any business that has gone through a rigorous panel of questions to show from a financial standpoint, as well as from an HR standpoint, the good, the benefit. The B stands for benefit, obviously.
Oh, well, not so obvious to me. Yeah, I just picked that up on that. Okay, great. Makes sense.
The benefit that we are providing to the local community, what we're doing kind of above and beyond as a business from a sustainability standpoint. We do more for our employees and their benefits as well. So it's kind of just going above and beyond the status quo as far as what we are able to do, what we are able to harness as a business to benefit the people around us and really go above and beyond for them. And so B Corps, as I said, have to go through a rigorous panel of questions and provide a lot of financial information to show what we're doing and our business practices of aiming to also, work with other businesses from a sustainable standpoint or minority owned businesses and vendors, things of that nature. So it's just an extra added benefit of showing participants and the community that we are a business that cares. We care about our employees. We care about the environment and the people that we work with.
And is that written into the charter of the company that basically, you're going to be doing things a certain way, or that there's other kinds of metrics that the corporation is aimed at achieving?
Yeah. So it is written into our business bylaws. And then within a few years, we have not transitioned to do this yet because we are an S Corp, but you transition to become a certified B corporation that shows this within your bylaws as well.
Okay, interesting. And of course, we forgot to mention that you sort of very slightly touched on it. All the great work you guys have been doing fundraising for cancer research. I think I read somewhere it's like in the millions, the money that you've raised, right?
Yes. So we have been working in collaboration with the Providence Cancer Institute for, going on about 12 years now. And thus far, with the Providence Cancer Research and Patient Advocacy programs, we have been able to fundraise over $6 million for the Providence Cancer Center. So with that, this year, thus far, we're on par to raise just this year alone over $1 million for cancer research. Right now, leading into the event, I think right now we're at 560,000, and it's just continuing on. So teams are very inspired to fundraise for a cause, and it really affects everybody. I feel like every family is somehow affected by cancer. And so people really take that on as an initiative to inspire them to participate in the race and inspire people around them as well. Because enough funding can go towards finding a cure. It's possible. And with the Providence Cancer Institute, their focus is really on immunotherapy and immunotherapy research. So that's been kind of our focus as well with Hood to Coast.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, cancer is, in many ways, it's totally a kind of spectrum of conditions where more funding would do a lot of good stuff. And it's great that you guys are helping out in that.
Yeah. Thank you.
I want to look into the future a little bit. It goes hand in hand with your international operations. So talk us a little bit through that. What has Hood to Coast been doing recently internationally?
Well, in about 2015, we were approached by some different international events that were already happening that were saying, we've been hearing about Hood to Coast over and over, and we want your event, and we want to bring this event to the masses in the Asian market. So we explored those capabilities and came to an agreement with them based on seeing and vouching for their portfolio of events that they had already put in place. So Nike actually was the introduction for us on that, because they're a major sponsor with Hood to Coast. And we now have Hood to Coast China. We have 2 events in China. We have had Hood to Coast Taiwan. We also have Hood to Coast Israel. And we're exploring another new potential venture in another Asian country, which hopefully I can tell you about this next spring. But we're in kind of the final works of that. But it's been really fun to see, again, the inspiration that it brings to these international runners when we go abroad. And they take it very seriously as far as their competition level. It's a whole nother notch above what Hood to Coast is here in the States, which is obviously the fun, the adventure, the challenge, where in a lot of these international markets, this is a prestige thing. Like they are out there to win. And the events sell out as well. So it's been really fun to see just kind of the different dynamic of the different runners that are out there. And I hope that, it keeps on the message and the brand of what Hood to Coast is, what it showcases, as we said before, the team aspect and the community. It's kind of it's kind of a new concept for those markets that we are now in, that long distance team relay event. So it's kind of almost that early 80s running boom that we had in the States has now happened in some of these Asian markets that we're now in, and they're really embracing it and having fun.
The one common, I guess, Hood to Coast fingerprint in all this, because obviously, there's no Mount Hood in China, but all of these events keep to the mountain to sea type of format, right? I mean, that I guess is the Hood to Coast connection in terms of the event.
Right. Yes. Mountains and sea are kind of that iconic part of what Hood to Coast is. So we do try to incorporate that into all of the international events in some way, because that's kind of the brand essence of it. And then having that amazing big finish party at the beach or at some location along the water. That's an important element as well.
Yeah, I think many of the people listening in will not have, international expansion ambitions necessarily. But I think it's interesting that you see these brands, and there's a couple coming out of the US. Grand Fondo New York was one of them. Obviously, UTMB in Europe does this as well, where you get an event whose brand is clearly associated with a place, right? Grand Fondo New York is New York. UTMB with Switzerland, with Mont Blanc, and they managed to shape international spin-offs of those races. So now you have GFNY Finland, you have, I mean, UTMB has its own World Series, where they do, like UTMB China, UTMB UK, whatever. And now you guys doing this, and still the appeal is to actually hold on to that brand recognition of the seed race, rather than say, hood to coast. What does that mean in China, right? I mean, what is right? And just drop it. Was that part of the thinking behind this?
Yeah, that was actually something that the international groups that came to us wanting to create this experience abroad, they came to us saying, we want to retain the name of Hood to Coast because it has so much brand cachet, and people understand what the essence of this event is going to be based on branding it Hood to Coast. So that was, wish we could take the credit for that, but that was those other entities saying people understand what they're going to get when the name Hood to Coast is there. So that was why we've continued it on.
And is there a master plan in terms of bringing all of this together? Maybe like a championship race, like Kona or UTMB, or like some kind of relay world championship or World Series?
Yeah, we have talked about that. We haven't actually instituted it yet, but if we expand to a few other potential international markets, we have talked about making the original Hood to Coast here in Oregon being the championship event, where we would bring the winner of each of those international Hood to Coast events to Hood to Coast here in August. They would compete for the championship final trophy and the honor of being kind of crowned overall Hood to Coast champions globally.
That's awesome. I mean, I wish you all the best of luck to bringing this to life.
Thank you.
And I'm starting immediately tomorrow, looking for another 11 people to come and join
Great.
me. Maybe 2024. It's a big ask for international teams, I guess, to find 11 or 12 people to compete.
There's other Greek runners.
That is true, and there's always the forum. I guess that was the one ray of sunshine for me. That even if I don't make it, I can just tag along into some other team and experience it that way, which I may even prefer, to be honest. Right? It's nice meeting people that way. I want to wrap up on something that you mentioned to me when we were chatting on the phone the other day. You've been the race director for this race for a long time. I mean, you know what you're doing by now, but I think you mentioned to me that initially you struggled with some aspects of the job. And I just wanted to end on that note for other race directors listening in. You were sort of sharing with me your troubled history with micromanagement. So you wanna tell people a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, we all have our learning experiences for sure. And from my background, and as many a race director can probably attest, you go into becoming a race director. I feel like maybe many of us are extremely organized, and have our checklists. We've got our methodology to everything. And I felt like, the first, maybe it took me longer than most, but I feel like for the first probably 5-6 years, I was really overseeing and probably micromanaging our staff a bit too much, to the point where I almost felt like, or they probably felt like I was trying to do their jobs for them. And it was, not mentally healthy for myself or for them as well. And it came to finally the realization that, look, we've trained these employees well. We need to trust in their capability and let them run with it. And they're going to make it their own. Yes, it's going to be different maybe from how I'm going to do it, but you need to let them have their small failures and overall grow and become stronger from this experience. And they will make it sometimes better than you ever thought that you could make it. And having the ability to kind of let your ego go to the side and realize, hey, maybe I'm not the best in this one aspect. They should take this on. They are going to be so much better at this certain area and specification than I am. has really been a godsend, because we all have our specialties, but we need to realize we're not going to be the best at everything. We cannot be everywhere. We will drive ourselves to burnout if we try to do that. So just kind of easing up a bit, for some of us that maybe are a little more type A or, very organized, but you put the right people in their jobs and you need to just trust them and let them run with it. And that's been a huge, educational piece for me moving forward. And it's made my life better. And I think all of their lives better. So in the long run, it's been a very positive experience. And I really enjoy all of our staff. They're all amazing, great people who really take ownership of their jobs. And I feel very lucky to be able to work with them.
As you say, I think what people realize when they go through this process is that the end result is really people doing great stuff. As you say, sometimes they do it a little bit different than you. But I guess instinctively, it's so difficult letting go, right? It's like jumping into the void. It's like, how's this thing going to happen? Yet the relief must be immense at the end, right? Because there's no other way, is there? I mean, and I'm saying, obviously in your case where you manage an event of this size, but I think for many race directors, the reason why I wanted you to sort of come out with this is that many race directors struggle so much, and people more generally of a certain predisposition, they struggle with this thing a lot. And there really is no other way than to just take that leap and just let people do their stuff. I don't know, close your eyes, go have a coffee or whatever, and then trust that things are going to be done. And they are done. And they're sometimes, as you say, they're done in better ways than you may have done them.
Yep, absolutely. It's so true. And I feel like I'm always learning. There's that capability never goes away. So I'm always learning things from them as well. And I try to have an open door of, come to me, even with my job, like, how can I do my job better? How can I keep learning? And I feel like also from a technological standpoint, there's always going to be things for me to learn. And, I'm not going to be the most with it. I mean, I'm not really on social media. So, there's other people that are better at those things than I am. And you have to just trust in their judgment.
Where can people find you online? I mean, you said you're not on social media. Email perhaps? Can they email you if they're interested in any of the stuff we've discussed today, or they want to reach out for whatever reason?
Yeah, absolutely. So they can find me on the one social media that I am on is LinkedIn. So Felicia Hubber on LinkedIn. And then, via email, Felicia@htcrelay.com, and then our website, hoodtocoast.com, and our social media handles, although I do not manage those for our staff, overseeing those. If you want to follow us and see what we're doing with Hood to Coast and some of our other events, we have Instagram at HTC Relay, and then we're on Facebook, which is just at Hood to Coast.
Awesome. So I want to wish you the very best of luck for your upcoming race 2023, which, as you said, is in 23 days from now. So just final straight, must be really stressful. And thank you very, very much for coming on. I think we all got a very good flavor of what the relay racing world is about. And I really appreciate those tips on volunteers. I hope it's as helpful to people as it sounded remarkable to me what you guys are doing with your policy of requiring teams to bring over volunteers and your whole video training module thing. So thank you very much for taking the time to come on.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. It was a great conversation.
Absolutely. It was my pleasure. All the best with Hood to Coast 2023. And thanks to everyone listening in. And we'll see you all on our next podcast. I hope you enjoyed today's episode on the Hood to Coast Relay with race director Felicia Hubber. You can find more resources on anything and everything related to race directing on our website, racedirectorshq.com. You can also share your thoughts about some of the things discussed in today's episode or anything else in our Facebook group, Race Directors Hub. Many thanks again to our awesome podcast sponsor, Run Sign Up, for sponsoring today's episode. And if you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to subscribe on your favorite player. And do check out our podcast back catalog for more great content like this. Until our next episode, take care and keep putting on amazing races.